It is 3 a.m. in New York, 8 in Berlin, and 4 on a Friday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. This is ARIRANG, Korea's only global network. Our top story this Friday afternoon, President Park Geun-hye's state visit to Germany. The Korean leader is waking up to her fourth day in Germany, and today in the former East German city of Dresden. The day before, on day 3 of her state visit to the European country, reunification continued to top the president's agenda. She visited the remains of the Berlin Wall and met with the leaders of German reunification to listen to their experience. Our Choi Yoo-sun is traveling with the president, and she filed this report from Dresden.
President Park, the leader of the world's only divided nation, visited a highly symbolic site of unity and freedom. Berlin's East Side Gallery is what's left of the Berlin Wall, covered in painted murals by more than 100 artists from around the world to commemorate the 1989 fall of the wall that led to German unification. The South Korean president also visited a photo exhibition that compares scenes from the demilitarized zone on the Korean peninsula and Germany's Grünes Bund, which is now an ecological park. The president had proposed turning the DMZ into something similar.
우리 나라의 DMZ도 언젠가는 평화의 상징으로 바뀌는 그런 날이 올 것이다 하는 그런 희망과 기대를 갖게 됩니다.
Staying with a reunification campaign, President Park met 5 former and current officials who were at the center of German unification, asking them to share their insights and wisdom. The group told the president there were frequent people exchanges between the East and the West that eventually led to a peaceful reunification. They said the German case is different from the situation on the Korean peninsula in that East Germans themselves had wanted change. At a luncheon with Korean and German businessmen, President Park vowed to prepare the Korean peninsula for a peaceful reunification. She then asked the business community to do their part in achieving a successful economic integration between the two Koreas. President Park is now in Dresden for the second leg of her state visit. Here, she is expected to lay out details of her reunification policy during a speech on Friday. Choi Yoo-sun, ARIRANG News, Dresden.
And as our Choi Yoo-sun just reported, President Park is expected to unveil her vision of a Korean reunification in Dresden at the Dresden University of Technology. Now, Dresden is a symbolic city in German reunification, as some of the most decisive events which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and German reunification in 1990 took place there. ARIRANG News will bring you a live coverage of her speech in Dresden at roughly 6:30 p.m. Korea time. Now, representatives from South Korea, Japan, and U.S. will soon meet in Washington to discuss the North Korean nuclear threat. The nuclear negotiators from the three nations. Now, this is part of a follow-up action from the Nuclear Security Summit when the leaders met on the sidelines in The Hague earlier this week. Our Shin Se-min explains.
South Korea and Japan may not share the same understanding of history, but one thing they do have in common is a desire to keep the peace in Northeast Asia. Seoul's defense ministry said Friday that South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. will hold defense trilateral talks on April 17th and 18th. They will include the deputy defense ministers from the three nations and represent the 6th such talk since 2008. At the center of the discussions will be North Korea's continued nuclear and missile threats. The nuclear program will also be a point of emphasis when the top nuclear negotiators from South Korea, the U.S., and Japan sit down for talks soon. No further details have been released. The official says discussions will center on strengthening cooperation against North Korea's nuclear threat and the possible restart of six-party talks. The defense talks next month and the future meeting between nuclear negotiators were both proposed earlier this week when the leaders of three countries met on the sidelines of the Nuclear Security Summit in The Hague. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the UN Security Council has strongly condemned North Korea's recent ballistic missile launches, calling them a clear violation of existing resolutions. Global powers, however, are less clear about what to do next. Our Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The UN Security Council has spoken with one voice on North Korea's launch of 2 mid-range ballistic missiles earlier this week. Expressing deep concern after a closed-door meeting on Thursday, the 15-nation council said it would hold consultations and respond appropriately to Pyongyang's latest provocation. The council's president, Luxembourg's UN ambassador Sophie Lucas, said it was a clear violation of Security Council resolutions. Despite concerns that they wouldn't, North Korea's biggest ally, China, supported the statement, but only to a point. Experts say it's unlikely Beijing will give its backing to additional economic sanctions on the North. In 2006 and 2009, the Security Council slapped 3 sanctions, banning the North from launching any type of missile that has ballistic capabilities. They follow North Korea's first and second nuclear tests. The Security Council expanded sanctions after another nuclear test in February of last year. North Korea fired 2 medium-range Nodong ballistic missiles into the East Sea in the early hours of Wednesday morning, Korea time. It was the first such mid-range missile launch since 2009. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
Well, the United Nations isn't the only one mulling over additional sanctions on Pyongyang. U.S. Congress wants to hit the leadership with more punitive measures for its brutal repression and abuse of the North Korean people. Connie Kim reports.
The United States is attempting to fast-track legislation to impose fresh sanctions against North Korea for its grave human rights abuses. Speaking at a congressional hearing on North Korea, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Ed Royce, said Washington will take every measure to hold the North Korean leader and his aides responsible for crimes against humanity. The bill is designed to directly affect the regime by cutting Kim Jong-un off from his hefty finances. It includes plans to ban financial institutions and other countries from having any kind of trade or cash transactions with Pyongyang. This would have a significant effect as North Korea is believed to have billions of dollars tucked away in various tax havens. The legislation, dubbed the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act of 2013, was proposed by Royce in April last year to further isolate Pyongyang from the international financial system. However, a report published by the U.S. Congressional Research Service suggests the bill could cause friction with South Korea, especially if Seoul decides to expand its joint Kaesong industrial complex with North Korea. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Korea's industrial output dropped in February for the second straight month, raising concerns that the domestic economy is not, in fact, on track to a strong recovery. Business sentiment among Korean manufacturers last month also remained quite weak. Our Hwang Ji-hye reports.
Korea's economic conditions might not be improving as quickly as many had hoped. Statistics Korea said Friday that the nation's industrial output shrank 1.8% last month from January, marking the second straight month of decline. The agency attributed the drop in output to slowing production in the nation's auto sector, which fell more than 7% in February on month. It cited fewer exports of Korean automobiles to the United States due to the harsh winter there and consumers waiting for the scheduled release of new models. The agency added that the decline is most likely temporary because the output numbers from January to February improved from the fourth quarter last year. Experts, however, remain dubious about the strength of the recovery this year. They say the domestic economy faces an uphill battle in trying to maintain the pace of recovery seen in the second half of last year.
If the economic growth rate reaches 1% every quarter this year from a quarter earlier, like the second half of 2013, the economy will be able to expand over 4% this year. But for now, that remains questionable.
The Bank of Korea data also showed that business sentiment among Korean manufacturers remained weak last month. Although the index reached 81, up from 78 in February, the reading is still below the benchmark 100, which means there are more pessimists than optimists. The central bank expects the Korean economy to grow 3.8% this year after a 3% growth last year. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
Well, despite slow economic growth, a majority of Korean lawmakers and high-ranking government officials seem to be enjoying their share of the pie. According to data released by the ethics committees of the country's legislative, legal, and administrative bodies, 60% of more than 2,300 officials saw their wealth increase last year. Well, the jump was attributed to a rise in the appraised value of land and personal savings. The average wealth of the officials stood at roughly $1.2 million, although they do not include 4 lawmakers whose net worth totaled over $46 million each. President Park Geun-hye's total assets came to over $2.6 million as of 2013, up $250,000 from the previous year. Well, the nation's financial authorities are gearing up for stricter guidelines on how customer information is shared between financial holdings companies and their affiliates. The Financial Service Commission and the Financial Supervisory Service are reportedly looking into instituting the changes as soon as May. Now, under the new restrictions, financial institutions would need to get prior consent from customers before sharing their personal information to other parties. They would also have to use client numbers instead of resident registration numbers. The changes were spurred after the personal data of up to 20 million Koreans was leaked from 3 credit card firms in January. Now, on a different note, the International Monetary Fund has agreed to provide up to $18 billion in loans for Ukraine, which, along with aid from the international community, will add up to $27 billion in total assistance in the next 2 years. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The International Monetary Fund on Thursday approved a bailout of up to $18 billion for Ukraine, throwing a much-needed lifeline to the crisis-stricken nation. Ukraine has been on the verge of default since the ousting of former President Viktor Yanukovych cut off $15 billion in aid from Russia. In a statement, the IMF said the 2-year package is expected to unlock more loans from the international community, including the U.S. and the European Union, to a total of about $27 billion. In return for the cash injection, Kiev has promised to undertake stringent economic, energy, and financial reforms. Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk said the nation's economy could contract by up to 10% this year without IMF support. On Wednesday, the new government agreed to raise the price of domestic gas by 50% from May, a demand of the IMF. U.S. President Barack Obama welcomed the IMF agreement, calling it a major step forward that would help stabilize Ukraine's economy. U.S. Congress on Thursday also overwhelmingly passed bills that provide $1 billion in loan guarantees to Ukraine and impose sanctions on Russia for its actions in Crimea. Moscow officially annexed Crimea following a referendum on March 16th. The United Nations has also thrown its support behind Ukraine. It approved a non-binding resolution that affirmed Ukraine's territorial integrity and called the Russian-backed referendum vote for Crimea's secession illegal. The largely symbolic resolution was backed by 100 countries, with 11 voting against and 58 abstentions. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Well, 30 years ago this Friday, the very first mobile communication device was introduced here in Korea. From car phones and pagers to cell phones and then smartphones, the rapid pace of development over the years has just been remarkable. Our Sohn Jung-in gives us a rundown of Korea's mobile devices since 1984.
Mobile phones have come a long way over the last 30 years in Korea, and it all started with the car phone. Despite it costing a whopping $3,700 in 1984, which back then was almost as expensive as the car itself, car phones created a buzz among the wealthy, and the number of subscribers had surpassed 2,000 just 1 month after being released.
The phone was very big, and many people were curious and asked if they could touch it or use it.
Then in 1986, the beeper, or as it's known in Korea, the pipi, came around. It was the nation's very first portable mobile device. It soon caught on, and carrying a pager on your belt became a fashion trend. Then in 1988, Seoul hosted the Summer Olympic Games, the same year that mobile phone services were first introduced. The phones, which were as big as bricks, launched the era of Korea's mobile communication industry. 8 years later, the world's first CDMA-based digital cellular service began in 1996, which was a stepping stone for the wireless technology to expand its territory. The number of cell phone users surged to over 10 million in just 3 years.
Korea easily adapted to the mobile devices, which changed people's daily activities and the productivity at companies.
Korea was once considered a wasteland for mobile communications, lagging 40 years behind the United States. But today, the nation is widely acknowledged as a world leader in the IT industry. Sohn Jung-in, ARIRANG News.
Well, Statistics Korea has released its annual Social Indicators 2013 Social Indicators Report. Now, this report includes the latest available economic, financial, social, and environmental indicators for the lives of the Korean public. And there are some interesting points of note, and for a closer look, we are joined live in the studio by Dr. Kim Byung-ju, the head of KLNP Consulting, and of course, our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So there in this report, we see some interesting snapshots of this country that may have economic and business implications.
Right, absolutely. I mean, this comes out every year, but every time there are all these interesting new things that we want to pay attention to. And let's start with IT business here. There's a new statistics about how many people are actually using mobile phones, and this is not new. What's interesting here is Korea is a country that has 50 million people. So obviously what you see right there, the number total, it's over 50 million. What that means is probably in my calculation, 1 out of 10 people have an extra phone.
So 2 mobile phones.
Right. So we have mobile phones that exceeds our population number here. Even babies counted, we have more mobile phones. And as you can see, the blue part, smartphones, they continue to increase. And the magnitude of increase is pretty big within a year. And at the same time, of course, the non-mobile, non-smartphones, their number have decreased. But in total, we have more mobile phones being used.
Right. I mean, that's not a surprise to me. I see, everyone.
Exceeding population?
Right. Well, exceeding population even, because I see people with, a number of smartphones, with 2 phones, using them both simultaneously even.
Right.
Now, one surprise we found was that the ratio of high school students entering college is dropping. Now, that's a surprise for me, because we all know the kind of the education fever that runs along the Korean parents.
Right, exactly. For other country, like a number of students entering college dropping would be a bad news. But for Korea, this I think is a good news, because we've been pointing out the number of the students going to college is just too many. And let's bring up the numbers here. And finally, in a very twisted case, the dropping numbers there is a good news, meaning that students are having more choice. What you notice here is a male and female. The drop in the total, I think, has a lot to do with the relatively speaking, rapid drop in the male student population entering college. Meanwhile, at the same time, female students, they continue to go into college in higher numbers, more than male students, and their number is increasing. So interesting phenomena here to note.
Well, definitely changing dynamics amongst the female population here in Korea. Now, another one is reflected in the statistics on public health for women in Korea.
Right, not only education, but also public health. Let's bring up very interesting numbers. I wanted to have this one showing more dramatic effect here, but they look about the same, but pay close attention to this. Smokers, for instance. Male smoker, the number is going down by about 3.5%.
So the blue bars represent the males, right?
Exactly, right. And then red bar represent female, and the more smokers among female population, about 1% increase. So while men are trying hard to quit smoking. More women are smoking these days. Maybe it has to do with the pressure with education and jobs and all that kind of stuff. Interesting numbers.
And I think it also may have to do with the view or perspective, changing perspective of the society where,
Possibly.
Before, I suppose years ago, those females who smoked that was frowned upon.
Right.
But, I think that's different now.
Same story about drinking. Let's bring up the next picture on drinking. Heavy drinking, well, there could be various different definitions about what heavy drinking means here, but, the Statistics Korea just used the most common way of excessive drinking, going beyond just casual drinking. And here, once again, fewer male are, well, of course, that 25% is still very high, of course, among male population. But the trend is we have declining trend, but among females, we have increasing trend. So as you pointed out, this is the overall very interesting changing dynamics for female population here.
Well, not necessarily very healthy trend, but, it is the trend these days.
Right.
There are also signs that more Koreans are focusing on themselves, perhaps turning more self-centered in a good way, right?
Right. The thing is, the good and bad news combined together. Let's bring up next graph here. And the thing is, we have just learned Koreans are giving less to other people. And this is a little bit of a disappointing trend. Cash donation from a year ago until last year, we saw a decrease here. But at the same time, as you mentioned, cultural activities for individuals. These are the percentage of individuals who are telling us that they are enjoying cultural activities. So as you said, more focus upon ourselves. That's what we notice.
Right, but giving less, that is not exactly a good thing. And I suppose with the rapid or with the gradual economic growth, we should be giving more.
Yeah, that's what I was expecting.
Right. I mean, that's something that we should look into in terms of the psychology behind that.
Right.
Now,
just a shallow observation may say the Koreans are turning selfish.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what that means. In terms of such activities, cultural activities, we find that the reason why Korea's movie industry is on an ever-growing trend.
Right, exactly. Very interesting number. Let's bring it up on the screen here. And there is a reason why we have Avengers 2 being filmed here in Seoul. Last year we had 200 million tickets sold here in Korea movies. As I mentioned before, we have a population of 50 million. So 200 million means every person saw at least 4 movies each. So that's a lot of number, and per capita, that's #1 in the world. In terms
Is it?
In terms of number of the total amount, 200 million, that's like a #5 or #4 in the world, but per capita, Korea is the largest. So indeed, it shows 85%, 86% of people are saying they're actively watching movies as a time to spend their leisure time, and there are other entries, but very interesting number.
Right, and I suppose that has something to do with the advanced facilities here in Korean theaters.
Right.
Compared
a very
to
strong Korean movie industry too.
Right. That is correct. The local homegrown movies are on the rise as well. But not only that, but the facilities of the theaters compared to others in the world, I think is outstanding.
I agree, definitely.
Now, and Koreans are not just watching more movies, but they're traveling more overseas for vacations, right?
Right. Last graph to bring on to the screen here. We know the overseas travel has been increasing. Let's bring it up. Yeah, it has been increasing. But overseas travels last year, 17%, over 70% of Koreans had overseas travel. I think that's an interesting number, which I didn't know before. And it just tells us how fast that industry itself is growing. And it could mean a lot of things for our viewers overseas who may be involved in leisure and tourism industry here.
Well, also important and very welcome news, it seems to be that, more people are traveling within this country as well.
Of course, yeah.
So,
67% is pretty high too, right?
So there's a growth on both fronts there.
Yeah.
All right, very interesting social phenomena going on here in Korea, and we look forward to next year's report and how that has changed from this year.
Okay, let's do that.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's looking beautiful outside today here in the capital, and because of this year's unseasonably warm temperature, the cherry blossoms are likely to bloom 1 to 4 days earlier than last year. Now, the first bloom is expected on April 17th in Chungcheongdo province, which is just over next week. Now, for more details, let's shift over to our satellite map. Although the sky is looking very clear, we currently have high levels of fine dust throughout the nation, so make sure to wear a mask on your way out. Now going over to our temperature readings, Seoul tops out at 23 degrees in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Gwangju and Busan will peak up to 24 and 20 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island can expect it up to 21 degrees. Dokdo peaks at 18, while Mankeumgang tops out at 14. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you, Kanyang.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for that. And that is all from me at this hour. Thank you for watching, and do join me again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.